All right, that podium means that we are awaiting the White House press conference, sure to be a fiery one on this day as James Comey's book is about to come out. I'm Melissa Francis, in today for Harris Faulkner. Have a great weekend. Here's Dana.
Fox News alert: the White House briefing is scheduled for about a half hour from now, as Sarah Sanders sure to take questions about newly released excerpts from former FBI Director James Comey's tell-all book. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. There is also breaking news, with President Trump issuing a pardon to Scooter Libby just a short time ago. Libby, who was Vice President Dick Cheney's chief of staff, had been convicted of lying to the FBI in 2007. We have Team Fox coverage. Fox News politics editor Chris Stirewalt is standing by. But let's begin with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge. Catherine, you spoke to Scooter. What did he have to say?
Yeah, within the last hour, I was able to have a very brief conversation with Scooter Libby. I want to be respectful of him and his privacy, but he did authorize me to report that he's very pleased. As he said, his innocence has been recognized, and he pointed to that White House statement. The key element in that White House statement, Dana, is that in about 2015, a witness in the case came forward and said that they believed evidence had been withheld from them during the prosecution process and the interview process, and that they would have testified quite differently if they had known that information. But in any event, Scooter Libby has spoken to me. I want to be respectful of that conversation, but he did authorize me to report that he's very pleased that his innocence has been recognized with this decision by the White House.
When we're going to talk more with Chris Stirewalt about all of it, the history of it and the politics of it today.
Right.
But I also wanted to ask you about another story that you're following today. What happened in court with Michael Cohen this morning?
Okay, so the hearing resumes this hour in a New York federal court, Dana, and based on the action this morning, a decision on the Cohen search warrant and the evidence is really on hold till Monday. Those raids executed earlier this week on Cohen's office, apartment, and hotel room seized business records and at least one computer and cell phone. Court must decide what evidence is fair game and not shielded by attorney-client privilege. One argument is that Cohen really functions more as a businessman and fixer for the president, and he's not covered by executive privilege. In court this morning, the two sides also debated the use of a so-called clean team. Usually this is composed of FBI agents or a federal magistrate who review the material and determine what is within the scope of the warrant and what has to be excluded based on attorney-client privilege. Also in court this morning, lawyers for ABC News and the New York Times, they argued for access to the court records and that the process should be as transparent as possible. The lawyer for Stormy Daniels was also there, and he backed up that request.
We don't know the full scope of everything that was seized. We are not privy to that information, but as a general proposition, we believe as much information about this process should be made public as possible. We're going to fight on behalf of the public and the press for that access.
A lawyer representing President Trump was also in court this morning. They say it really boils down to three major issues that have to be resolved by the court. The first impacts the President of the United States. The second applies to press freedom. And the third applies, they said, to every American who hires a lawyer and wants a guarantee that those communications will remain private. Dana.
Catherine, thank you for all of that.
You're welcome. Sure.
Now let's bring in Fox News politics editor and editor of Halftime Report, Chris Stirewalt. Let me bring up for you just a full screen here from Judith Miller, who was part of the saga that Scooter Libby dealt with. And she writes that she worried her memory may have failed me during the trial. And I think that is who they are talking about in the presidential statement, saying that there was new information presented in 2015, and then Scooter Libby's lawyers continued to work on that and talk to the president and were able to make the case for him. Your thoughts?
Well, whatever this says about Scooter Libby, and whatever this says about Dick Cheney and the Bush administration and the Iraq War and Valerie Plame and Joe Wilson and all that razzmatazz, I think there's a louder message that comes forward from this today. And that is to all of those who are now being interviewed by the FBI, to all of those who are caught up in the scandals around the president and now around the president's attorney, that this is a president who doesn't have a problem with pardoning people who are charged with or convicted of lying to federal agents. He's saying, look, you know, you're going to be put in difficult spots. And also, if you recall, one of the big complaints among Republicans about President Bush not pardoning Scooter Libby, just commuting his sentence, he didn't have to serve any prison time, but he was not granted that pardon, was essentially that Bush was not being partisan enough, that he was not playing hard enough hardball, and that instead, basically, the people who were proponents of Libby's pardon said Democrats would do it, you should do it, you need to do this to send a message that we take care of our own. President Trump is sending the message today, we take care of our own.
Yes, of course, I remember it well. And one of the things, just looking back at President Bush's book today, just to refresh my memory, was that he had asked for all the evidence to be reviewed by a lawyer again, all the testimony, and then made that decision. But again, I do think that new information that came out in 2015 did have a bearing on this. But I think that you're right in terms of the politics about how this is going to look. I mean, we're talking about an investigation that has a James Comey link. James Comey is the one who put in place the special counsel to investigate the Valerie Plame matter, and he put Patrick Fitzgerald in front of that, and it ultimately ends up with Scooter Libby being the only one that really actually got indicted. And it was for something that, again, I do think that there's meritorious reasons for why he should have been pardoned, but I think those reasons are going to be overlooked because of the politics.
Well, and it is useful for, look, if you're the president, you've got your own personal lawyer, had his office, hotel room, and home raided. We are told by reliable reporting from other places that he had a habit of recording phone conversations and keeping tapes of things. How much Cohen knows about what, and how many other people that have been in the president's orbit that have already talked to the FBI or will be talking to the FBI in the coming days. There's a huge amount of exposure out there, and it will be comforting for them to believe that, much as the president did with his first pardon of Joe Arpaio out in Arizona, it's like, you like it, you don't like it, I don't particularly care, I'm taking care of my people, and you guys can go pound salt. And that is, I'm sure, a message that the president wants somebody like his attorney to hear loud and clear. In
the meantime, the James Comey book is out, and I've got some experience, as you do, of Washington, D.C. books that take up all the oxygen for about 3 weeks, and then pretty much it's over. There's no real lasting effect. George Conway, who happens to be married to Kellyanne Conway, tweeted this morning, the hype around Comey's book and the RNC's attempts to discredit it both proceed from the same false premise, that James Comey has something important to reveal about Donald Trump that Donald Trump has not already revealed about himself. Washington will be in a frenzy for a few days about this, but in the long run, do you think it has any impact?
I think Comey is, especially if you read the part where Comey talks about why he slammed Hillary Clinton with that late game announcement, that he was doing it for her own good. He was trying to help her. I think Comey here is trying to suck up to #resist and make common cause with these folks who he hopes, I'm sure.
I don't think that's going to work, because as mad as the Republicans are at James Comey, I think it's arguable that the Democrats are even more frustrated with him, because he says that about why he said that Hillary Clinton was under investigation, but he doesn't talk about, at least as far as I've seen, why he didn't say that President Trump's campaign was also under investigation at the same time.
All of that is true, comma. However, the Democratic hatred...
Semicolon, actually.
Semicolon, yes, ma'am. The deal here, Democrats hate Trump with the white-hot passion of 10,000 suns. It obscures every other thing. This focus, it's even more intense than the Republican hatreds toward Obama. It is real and it is live. And Comey knows, just like, remember that book, Fire and Fury? Yeah. Comey knows if he can tap into that same energy, that same rage, he got to sell a lot of books. And I don't understand the RNC and what they're doing in terms of giving more oxygen to this, except for this. They want their foot soldiers. They want their Twitter warriors and their foot soldiers and the people who back the president to the hilt to be out there fighting every day.
All right. Chris Stirewalt, thank you.
You bet.
The UN Security Council holds an emergency meeting as the U.S. and its allies weigh possible military action against Syria for a suspected chemical weapons attack. U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley saying President Trump has not made a final decision yet.
You don't rush decisions like this. If you rush decisions like this, you make a mistake. What we're making sure is that we have all the information to know if we do something, what will happen, how will it happen, and will it hurt anyone.
National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon. What is the mood there in Washington, Jennifer? Do we think anything is imminent?
Well, Dana, there is another senior national security meeting at the White House late this afternoon with the president. All eyes will be on that meeting. From the Pentagon's point of view, the various military options were presented to the president yesterday during that nearly 2-hour national security meeting at the White House. It was a menu of options, I'm told, broader and involving more targets than what was presented to the president a year ago after the last chemical weapons attack. Russia's foreign minister called the evidence a hoax, even suggesting UK special forces may have faked it.
Our specialists who examined the area did not find any confirmations of application of chemical weapons, chlorine, or any other kind of poison. Moreover, we have irrefutable evidence that this was another staging which the special services of a certain nation had a hand in, a nation that is trying hard to be in the front row of the Russophobic campaign.
On Friday, a team of chemical weapons inspectors headed into Syria to try to collect evidence. The OPCW, or Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons Inspectors, hope to be on the ground in Duma on Saturday, Dana.
I wanted to bring up two things. The one question is just how much we don't actually get to see. And the effects of chemical weapons attacks, we see some of the photographs and the videos, but it is the case that they protect the public from seeing a lot of that. And I think it is very damaging for Russia and Syria and Iran as they face what is possibly going to happen. But I also wanted to get your take on the reaction from Britain and France. And are they prepared to join us militarily?
Well, it's interesting. The British ambassador to the UN called Russian claims that it may be behind faking the chemical weapons attack a blatant lie. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley spoke at the UN moments ago and presented a united front with France and Britain, all of whom have agreed to participate in military action.
There is proof that this happened. But what I will tell you is, as a mother of 2 children, as a wife of a combat veteran, I am unbelievably proud of how President Trump has looked at the information, analyzed, not let anyone rush him into this.
Meantime, the U.S. has added another guided missile destroyer to the 6th Fleet. The USS Winston Churchill will join the USS Donald Cook and 2 U.S. warships with missile capability in the Red Sea. French President Emmanuel Macron called Vladimir Putin today. Any U.S. strikes in Syria risk hitting Russian or Iranian forces. The Syrian military has moved jets to Russian air bases, protecting them from potential American bombs. The Pentagon wants to know what comes next if a strike is ordered. Dana?
Indeed. All right, Jennifer, thank you. And up next, Senator Cory Gardner with his reaction to what should happen in Syria, plus some breaking news on states' rights and legalized marijuana. Trump and his national security team focusing on Syria as Russia's President Putin vows retaliation for any military action against Syria. Colorado Senator Cory Gardner is a Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee and chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, joining me from our great mutual hometown of Denver, Colorado. Sir, let me ask you to respond to something that happened yesterday between Cory Booker and Mike Pompeo, the nominee to be Secretary of State. Watch this. We don't have it?
Does the president have the authority to launch strikes against the government of Syria?
Senator, yes, I believe that he does.
So you do not believe there should be there is a need for a new authorization for the use of military force to cover such an attack?
Senator, I believe that he has the authority. He needs to do that today. I don't believe we need a new AUMF.
Senator, where do you fall on that argument?
Well, I think this is a little bit of a box canyon that Senator Booker was trying to lead the nominee into, Director Pompeo into. There's no doubt the president has constitutional authority to carry out an Article 2 action against a threat to the United States. This is international law being violated, again showing the dark edge of humanity by gas attacks on Syrian children and people by the regime. So it is in the right, constitutional, for the president to do something. But he also knows that the president should come to Congress should there be further actions, should there be further actions required or needed with an AUMF. And so this is not a one-size or zero-sum game here. The president has the right, but the president knows he should, and his, Secretary Mattis, Secretary Tillerson before, Director Pompeo, all recognize the need to keep Congress informed and to develop the appropriate AUMF when necessary.
And in fact, I understand that the White House reconfirmed that Congress will be notified before any action is taken. I did want to ask you about that Pompeo hearing. So he won approval from several Democrats when he became CIA director. Now we're a year into the presidency. Things are hotter when it comes to politics. And I wondered, just as the National Republican Senatorial Committee campaign director, if you will be trying to help press red state Democrats. I'm going to put up 4 of them actually voted for Pompeo to be CIA director. Donnelly, Heitkamp, Manchin, and McCaskill. Do you think that they should vote for him to be State Department secretary?
Well, I think Director Pompeo clearly has what it takes to be a great Secretary of State. He has the military understanding, the diplomatic understanding, certainly the intelligence background through the CIA. If you're in a state like North Dakota, Indiana, Missouri, West Virginia, you name it, I think Director Pompeo is somebody that the people of your state will support. And I also want to point out what another senator has said. Another senator, Democrat, who voted for then Director Pompeo. He said he has lived up to my expectations as Director of the CIA, but I'm not sure how I'm going to vote as Secretary of State. So there's a problem they're going to have because they think he's done a good job as Director of the CIA. Most people believe he's done a good job as Director of the CIA, and now they're trying to find, what can I look at to vote against him? What excuse can I use? But in certain states that voted for Donald Trump by 30-40%, that's going to be a hard excuse to follow.
And of course, if they're reading the Washington Post editorial board today saying that Mike Pompeo should be confirmed to that seat. I wanted to ask you about, I understand a conversation that you had with the president about something that you've been really tracking closely, and that is the issue between the federal government and states like Colorado that have legalized marijuana. What's the update?
Yeah. Well, I believe in states' rights, and the other day the president notified me that he would be supporting a states' rights approach when it comes to legalized marijuana. The states will be able to determine what they want going forward on recreational medical marijuana. So we're going to be working on legislation. He said he would support that legislative effort. We're going to get together with people on both sides of the aisle to put that forward and get it onto the president's desk.
Do you think that supersedes then anything that the Attorney General has put forward at the Justice Department?
Yeah, what the president has said is that states like Colorado will be protected, the legal industry, as long as it's following state law as we work on this state's approach. The president during his campaign said he supported states' rights and believed that a states' rights approach was the best direction for decisions like this. And this is a continuation of that campaign promise that he laid out.
And beyond that, yesterday we talked about how former Speaker John Boehner is now on board of the train to try to deschedule marijuana from the Schedule 1 list on the federal government's illegal substances list. Do you think that that's going to actually go anywhere this year? Because it seems like to me that it's gaining steam.
Yeah, it certainly is gaining steam, and I think 80% of the American people believe that states should be left to determine this decision. States should have this ability on their own to decide whether they do this or they don't. And so I think that's the direction that we head, is we let states determine. This is a states' rights issue, a 10th Amendment issue, an Interstate Commerce Clause issue, and that's what most people recognize.
Yes, it is certainly changing things. All right, Senator Cory Gardner, have a good weekend. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
President Trump pardoned Scooter Libby. Could the Russia investigation be playing a role in the timing? Plus, we're awaiting the White House briefing. Sarah Sanders expected to face questions on a busy day. We'll bring it to you live. President Trump has pardoned Scooter Libby, Vice President Dick Cheney's former chief of staff, who was convicted of lying to the FBI in 2007. Joining me is A.B. Stoddard, associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics. I guess you got the green memo, which is always good.
It's spring at last.
So, you and I know this story very well. And Scooter Libby is an exceedingly intelligent, very polite, mild-mannered patriot who got caught up in this special counsel investigation and was convicted. And then the new information comes out in 2015 leading to this pardon. And it's interesting to me to look at it from a meritorious standpoint for should he have been granted a pardon, but the timing of it politically is going to get a lot of attention.
Right. People that you worked with in the George W. Bush administration, Dana, are exulting on Twitter about this. This has been a cause for a long time among conservatives who felt that he was treated unfairly and wronged and deserved a pardon. He petitioned for a pardon. It's not like this came out of nowhere. But President Trump, when he was a candidate in 2015, reportedly was asked about this and wasn't much interested in it then. If you look at the timing, it really is sort of a threefer. It makes the case that special counsels can run amok in trampling into extra legal territory and treating people unfairly. That is a theme that President Trump wants to hit. Patrick Fitzgerald, the special counsel in the Scooter Libby case, that prosecutor was appointed by James Comey and is a friend of Comey's, so he can hit back at Comey at the same time. And I agree with Chris Stirewalt that it sends that message to people who are in the heat of the Mueller investigation that if they run into charges of lying to the FBI, obstruction of justice, or perjury, they too could potentially receive a pardon.
And the pardon issue is always interesting. It's one of the powers that the President of the United States has that's almost, I guess, almost king-like. But it is one that is exercised sort of judiciously. I mean, there's not been a whole, wave of pardons. And I think the last three presidents in particular, at least President Bush, President Obama, and so far President Trump, have held back. This one, I think, does send a message, as did his first one of Sheriff Joe Arpaio of Arizona.
Right. That was widely criticized by people like Senator John McCain, who said that Sheriff Joe Arpaio wasn't contrite, had no humility about what he'd done, didn't think anything he had done was wrong. And these can be incredibly controversial, and that's why people use them sparingly, because it's an enormous broad power, and each one sends a political message. So it's interesting. President Trump, we know, likes to change the topic when there are contentious topics in the news that he doesn't like. But if you look at the timing of this, it really is interesting. It really kind of came out of nowhere. And I still think even if he ends up pardoning people who are under the Mueller spotlight and tangled up in that probe, that he'll still use it judiciously. But I think he sent the signal, and we know that his lawyers and his advisors have spoken about this over the last year, about the potential of using pardons on those people. And I think it reinforces that message that I'm looking out for you, and you might in the end enjoy a pardon if you need one.
That's right. Oh, very interesting. A.B. Stoddard, thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
James Comey making headlines as excerpts from his tell-all book are out. Up next, we'll get more reaction on how they might impact President Trump. Plus, we will bring you the White House briefing when it starts. Keep it here.
When someone watches the news, they want someone they can trust. Our job is to cut through the talking points.
We're going to ask the tough questions because there's a lot of conventional wisdom out there that needs to be challenged.
What I'm doing is making sure that whatever is developed through the day, people are fully informed from coast to coast.
We're 24/7 news, but we're really down to the minute.
We're going to be fearless. We're going to be fair.
Whether it's 4 a.m. or midnight, we're there.
We are awaiting the White House briefing, now set for 2:45 p.m. Eastern Time, where Sarah Sanders is sure to face some questions after the release of excerpts from former FBI Director James Comey's tell-all book about the president. Let's bring in Axios national political reporter Jonathan Swan. This was one of those stories that you knew it was coming. There was a book release date, and it was going to come out sooner than later. And here we go. It's the weekend when all of Washington will be talking about this. What's the scuttlebutt down there?
All of that's true that you just said, but the White House did not prepare for this in any serious way.
Really?
They're scrambling. No.
Because it seems to me the RNC is really quite organized with all of their Lion Comey takes.
Right. Well, they've got a website that has some quotes from some Democratic officials, but the White House internally was very slow to kind of get their act together on this. Their strategy, to the extent that one exists, is portray him as a partisan political figure and to use two words: he's a liar and a leaker. And you're going to see that theme repeated over and over and over again. But I will say, in terms of the concern level that I'm picking up in the White House, it's not actually as intense as maybe you would think from watching TV. Like, there's nothing in this book that adds to the legal case against Comey, against the president. And of the hierarchy of things that they're concerned about in the last couple of weeks, the raid on Michael Cohen's office and the opening of that investigation is vastly higher than anything in James Comey's book.
But one thing that is a little bit different is that a side story that's getting a lot of attention, a little bit. And again, I don't think it's huge news, that James Comey says that he received a phone call from the now Chief of Staff, John Kelly. What's that about?
Well, this is something that this has caught people's attention from sources close to Trump. James Comey writes in the book that after Trump fired him, he immediately got a call from John Kelly, who was then the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And he says that Kelly told him that he felt sick about the way that Trump had fired him, and that he personally was considering quitting his job because he didn't want to work for dishonorable people. Now, through a spokesperson, Kelly has denied saying this and says that they had a short conversation, but this has really caught the attention of some people close to Trump.
There hasn't been too much pushback, though, from the White House on that.
No, and
memories
you know what?
can be, I mean, when you're remembering a conversation from a year or so ago, you can understand that there might be some discrepancy.
I would also say if Kelly really wanted to deny it, he would be out publicly denying it, and he's been very quiet, because how would you allow something like that to stand if it wasn't true?
I agree. I also wanted to ask you about Michael Cohen. How you say that is actually something that is on the mind at the White House.
Sure.
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is the Michael Cohen saga has always been something that's concerned people close to Trump. And the reason for that is very simple. He has more visibility than just about anyone into the president's personal business affairs for the past decade. And this went right to the heart of that. This is not under the purview and the limited scope of the Mueller probe. This is the Southern District of New York, and it's a separate deal. And when they go, the worry among these people is when they go down the Michael Cohen rabbit hole, what else do they find and where does that lead? And it's clearly something that concerns the president, and you can see that from his public behavior.
And meanwhile, the White House is also trying to figure out what to do next in Syria. And I think that what you'll end up seeing, as Nikki Haley was on our air earlier, well, she was not talking to us personally, but she was talking about how the decision is being deliberative. They're trying to pull together a coalition. They're being very thoughtful, because this next move will have to be followed up with something else that will have to be much more strategic than just that limited strike from a year ago.
Right, and there's a very delicate line that they have to walk, because they don't necessarily, there are Russians in the area, and despite President Trump being much more aggressive in his language about Putin, they don't want to start World War III with whatever they do here. So it's a very, very delicate decision-making process. Not to mention that it's very hard to, I mean, they say confidently that Assad did this and that is the consensus, but, even being specific about attribution is difficult when there's so much confusion on the ground and so much chaos there.
All right. Jonathan Swan, we appreciate you being on the show today. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. As the UN Security Council holds an emergency meeting on Syria, the White House says no final decision has been made on responding to that suspected chemical attack, as we were just talking about a moment ago. This as Russia warns the U.S. against taking any steps that could make matters worse in the region. David Lee Miller joins me live from Jerusalem. David Lee, have we confirmed that this was a banned chemical weapons attack?
Dana, just a short time ago, the U.S. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley confirming on the record that the U.S. now believes this was a chemical weapons attack in the Syrian town of Douma on Saturday. Now, in some of the bluntest language that we have heard yet, Nikki Haley said that there is a triple confirmation of this. By that, she meant the U.S. believes this as well as its allies. Listen.
I will tell you that, first of all, did a chemical weapons attack happen? Yes. The U.S. has analyzed, yes, it has happened. The U.K. has analyzed, yes, it has happened. France has analyzed, yes, it has happened. 3 separate analyses, all coming back with the same thing. There is proof that this happened.
Russia, meanwhile, standing by the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, continues to say there were no chemical attacks. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, speaking in Moscow, said there is proof the reported chemical attack was staged.
We have irrefutable information that it was another fabrication and intelligence agencies of a state that is now striving to spearhead a Russophobic campaign who were involved in that fabrication.
Russian officials say it was the UK that fabricated evidence by exerting powerful pressure on Syrian civilians to shoot a fake video at a hospital. A fact-finding team from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has now arrived in Syria to determine if, in fact, chemical weapons were used. Not clear to what extent, if any, the presence of that team on the ground is going to affect a timeline for possible military action by the United States. Dana?
All right, David Lee, thank you. Midterm mania intensifying as Democrats threaten more House seats held by the Republicans. Plus, we're awaiting the White House press briefing. We'll bring that to you live when it happens.
Smith on the Fox News desk. The White House briefing just minutes away, we're told, and there's a lot to cover today. President Trump's personal attorney is fighting to see what the feds took in their raids before prosecutors get to see it. Plus, President Trump calling the former CIA director James Comey a slime ball after Comey compared the president to a mob boss. And there's a lot more from both sides. We're also waiting for President Trump to announce a decision on whether to strike in Syria. The news begins top of the hour on Shepard Smith reporting. We'll see you then.
Fox News alert: the Justice Department just issuing its report on former Deputy Director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us now. You get no rest, Catherine. We got to bring you back for this. Tell us what you learned in that quick review.
Okay, so I'm just going through the report right now to summarize for folks at home. Based on our earlier reporting, we understood that McCabe had violated 3 ethics violations of the FBI, which was lying under oath, lying not under oath, and then also the disclosure of non-public information. And what we see in the Inspector General's report, the first headline to me is that this actually began as a leak investigation to understand why the Wall Street Journal in October of 2016, so just before the election, disclosed information about the existence of the FBI investigation into the Clinton Foundation. And if you come back to me a moment, the key paragraph, the key section is right here, and it reads in part, "We concluded that McCabe's decision to confirm the existence of the Clinton Foundation investigation through an anonymously sourced quote, recounting the content of a phone call with a senior department official in a manner designed to advance his personal interests at the expense of department leadership." So the bottom line is that the former deputy director was in a position to authorize the release of this information, but the Inspector General concluded that he did so not because it was in the public interest, but because it was simply in Andrew McCabe's interest to protect his reputation and that of his family as well, Dana.
If I could follow up with you on that, Catherine, just so I can understand. So he's confirming that the Clinton Foundation is under investigation, which arguably could hurt the Clinton campaign a month before the election.
Correct.
This is right before James Comey comes out and says, oh, she's also under investigation because of the emails. So there's another one. What I don't understand is how McCabe announcing that to the press anonymously or confirming that would have advanced his own personal interests. Is there anything that they can tell us that describes
Sure. Okay.
that?
So yeah. So for a little bit more context, I perhaps should have offered that to you, so it was not in any way confusing. In October of 2016, there was a report in the Wall Street Journal which talked about the political contributions which had been made to Andrew McCabe's wife, Dr. Jill McCabe, which was for a state Senate race in 2015, and she had received from Terry McAuliffe, the Virginia governor, and his PAC at the time, upwards of $500,000. This was seen certainly within law enforcement circles and critics of the FBI as evidence that Andrew McCabe had a conflict of interest when it came to the Clinton email probe. So when you look at the leak about the foundation, that was kind of his way of awkwardly pushing back that he was impartial, not only with the email investigation, but also with the ongoing investigation of the Clinton Foundation. But the bottom line as you go through this IG section, this Inspector General report, is that you see he lied on multiple occasions to multiple investigators. First, the leak investigators at the FBI, and then following that to his boss, Director Comey. He told him he was not the source of this leak to the Wall Street Journal, and then ultimately with the Inspector General as well. So it was a pattern and practice of leaks on this particular issue. But again, the key quote here is that he had the authorization to make this information public, but they felt he did not do so for reasons that were within the public interest. He did it for reasons that were to benefit Andrew McCabe, and that they felt was not acceptable.
Yeah, it's interesting. What a tangled web.
That's a great word to use there.
Oh my gosh. TGIF, Catherine.
Yeah,
all right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So there's a live look inside the White House where we are expecting a briefing at any moment, and we'll take you there live. Now let's bring in Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report, Chris Starwald. I've got 3 breaking news stories that I'm going to ask you about. One of them you might not have even heard about yet. I just heard this in my ear. Apparently, Meet the Press has interviewed Speaker Paul Ryan. And in this interview, according to Meet the Press, Paul Ryan is saying that he is going to endorse Kevin McCarthy to be the next speaker. What do you make of that?
If he gets there. The idea that Ryan could remain as a caretaker speaker until the election always sounded far-fetched to me. There are already lots of folks militating for sooner votes. The pressure's on from the right. Ryan can endorse McCarthy and try to have a reasonable transition here. And McCarthy, of course, relying on President Trump's support, or hoping that he'll be able to get President Trump's support in this. I'm not so sure. It would depend on the timing. It would depend on how they want to do the vote. That is no sure thing. And I'm not even sure that Ryan's endorsement helps McCarthy that much.
All right. Well, we'll keep track of that. The other thing that broke just before, while we were in commercial break, because it's been quite an hour, there's another story coming out of this Michael Cohen raid, and it has to do with Republican fundraiser Elliot Broidy. He is the deputy finance chair of the Republican National Committee. He has just stepped down from that position. According to 3 people familiar with the matter, this is a Politico report. The departure follows reports on Friday afternoon that in 2017, President Donald Trump's attorney Michael Cohen had negotiated a $1.6 million payment on Broidy's behalf to a Playboy playmate who said that Broidy had impregnated her. And that resignation was first reported by the Wall Street Journal. So just making sure everybody's covered with this breaking news. What do you think of this?
Woof. And also in that case, the money, according to the Journal, came with the demand that she abort the baby.
Of which Broidy is saying that that is not true, that she made that decision on her own.
Yeah.
We don't know.
So this is heinous. And, you know, the Cohen stuff that started with the Stormy Daniels business and all of that, as this continues to spool out, we find out the magnitude of the liability that Cohen represents to Trump, the man who promised that he would always protect the president, always stand up for Trump, no matter what, that he would take the heat. It's not, in this case, whether or not he wants to take the heat or can't take the heat. It's that what results from the mistakes and the errors that Cohen has made as the president's attorney and in his own practice will now redound to the president's serious discredit on a forward-going basis.
And they are still in court today in New York City trying to talk about suppression of that evidence to protect attorney-client privilege. And then we just had the breaking news about the IG report, the Inspector General report from the Justice Department about the former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who apparently, according to this report, it says that that he lied multiple times about talking to the press, but he talked to the press about confirming a investigation into the Clinton Family Foundation. And apparently this was to advance his own interest, to protect himself because of the accusations that his wife was getting too many campaign donations from the Democrats, including Terry McAuliffe, the former governor of Virginia. Do you follow me?
Yeah, I'm smelling what you're smoking, but here's the deal. On a day where right now the former FBI director James Comey is trying to cast himself as the martyr of the era of Trump, we have another strong indication here that during his time at the FBI, things were not run well. That is not a well-run thing to have this guy who is an acolyte of Comey's, who is a devotee, his ally, his number 2, who is out moving inventory like this in a self-interested way, whichever candidate it hurt or helped. If he's doing this stuff, that is a very poor reflection on Comey's regime at the FBI.
And I have a minute left. I want to ask you about just the overall feeling over at the FBI. You have agents all across the world who are so true to that organization and that institution and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And to be in the spotlight and to feel like things just weren't done right has got to be taking a toll at the agency.
Look, the agents I have talked to, current and former, and what their attitude is and all of that, yeah, it definitely takes a toll when you have both your president attacking you, but also you're getting attacks from the other side because of what happened with Hillary Clinton, and also the awareness that maybe Comey's time there wasn't what he said it was and wasn't how it was. Yes, all of those things take a toll. But I will also point this out. These are tough-minded men and women. They have responded, and if you've looked at the way that Rod Rosenstein has responded, if you look at the way that Christopher Wray has responded, if you look down the line how they have reacted, they have tightened up. They have leaned into this storm, and they, I think, are very determined at this moment that for all of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that have been visited upon them and shall be visited upon them yet, that they are going to acquit themselves well in this moment, because they know that nothing less than the trust of the American people in our federal judicial system and our law enforcement system is at stake.
As the White House tries to grapple with all of these different news stories that we've just touched on here, and that doesn't even count the ones that we haven't touched on.
Exactly. I don't even know what's come into my phone since we've been talking.
Arguably, the first and most important obligation is to protect the American people. Your last thoughts about the Syria, the possible strike there?
Isn't it astonishing that everything is so crazy in Washington now, and the foam is so foamy that we don't really we're not focusing on the most important question, which is we are on our way towards a confrontation with the second most powerful military in the world, and we barely have time to catch our breath talking about all this other stuff.
All right. Chris Stirewalt, thank you so much. Lots of news. The White House press secretary will come out soon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dana Perino. And Shepard Smith will be with you with all the news after the break.